Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, reviewing and summarizing its conclusion. We are on page 1370, 1371. Middle of speaking about the Mishna Baraisa, which is another dimension of the Teres HaTanoim, from the Tanoim. But as he explained, Baraisa from the word external, outer, outside of. The words he used was Shen Levar Megufa. And the body would be, the structure would be where Chagas is the torso essentially. And Nehi is the next level, would be we call the Trei Yarchin, the Yarchin, which is the thighs. So it's not Nehi. So though the thighs is Netzach and Hoid, but then he explained three levels of how the mashpia, in order to transmit to the makabel, has to grow through. So chagas is the actual hashpah, and then the hashpah itself goes through different stages till it's commensurate the fiklei makabel. Like he said, abal seichel god leini yochel limud lashpia haseichel talmidei. He can't teach the idea to the Talmud without doing something with the depth, the emek of Penimiyus sichlei begili erav. Because the Talmud is not a keli for it, the way it is by the mashpia. So the mashpia has to be mekatze the hashpah. But one, he has to summarize it, has to condense it. The feifon and makabel. Same thing with hashpah chesed. If it's reiv teva, too much chesed, like we spoke the example of too much rain, ein yochel lekabel rav tuv ubehechach letzamtzem hashpah. He has to diminish it. And that's Netzach and Hoid. And he explained the difference between Netzach and Hoid. Netzach is a branch of Chesed. Hoid is a branch of Gvura. So the branch of Chesed, which is Netzach, you need Netzach Shetia Hashpah. And he explained that in the parentheses, that's that form of ikuf, of restraint and refrain within himself, the profound or intense love. He needs, if it was completely in its intensity, it would be chesed beriboy and overwhelm the recipient. Same thing with hashpah saseichel. Al kein tzarich la'akiv moker hashpah. So in the very source within the mashpia, he has to refrain. He has to put on some brakes that the hashpah should be more limited, and it shouldn't come out flowing. Like you can see, for example, I remember we had a Rosh Yeshiva. He was a genius. But he got so excited with his ideas, he would just speak so quickly, nobody could even understand what he was saying. He was so excited about what he was saying. It was just flowing out of him in an unfiltered, unregulated way. So he needs that ikuf. And he called that hashpah b'derech nitzach. What's the role of Hoid? He said, Hoid, anaf hagvur, is already at tzimtzum in the very flow itself, as he explains. Netzav hashpah ba'atzmei. And Hoid, the tzimtzum helam in the hashpah, he's already being mashpia, but that mashpah is coming in a commensurate to the student, the helam b'hashpah, and he says, like the difference in Nehi Penimiyum and Nehi Chitzenim. Nehi Penimiyum is like the klois sheitzes or the train bayin. These are either like the kidneys or the testicles, which is within the hashpah itself, is a form of not in the hashpah, in the source of the hashpah, is a form of regulating the flow, and the Chitzenim is the Yarchin. Those are the Yarchin, like he said, like we learned earlier. Yarchin, the Katsa, the thighs, the Katsa Hashpah, this is already coming outside of him. Like we said, the thighs are outside of the body, that it should come drop by drop, tippin. Uberuchnius, that's the limit, b'derech tzara, like the Kitzur Mishna, Kedem HaRicha Shebegemara. And that's the distinction between Netzach and Hoid. And then finally he said, V'gam sarach l'hailim es hashpah shetove be'efa nachar. So in addition to these two elements we just spoke about, within himself and in the flow, that the flow itself should come commensurate to the student, is now more of a qualitative shift. With the idea, the paradigm has to change, because the seichel, like he speaks, the example he gave for a Penimiyus HaTeira, the Penimiyus of the halacha is in a different level than the halacha gashmis, which a person can relate to. Here's the halacha. But the primis atera of it is the where it's rooted is in a different qualitative level. And the same thing he brought and also with examples and explanations in a way that should be understood to the makabel. So basically, this third element is the shift of the paradigm or the shift of the context, if you wish, of how the idea that way it's in its original form. Whereas in level 2, it's the original idea, but in a form of tippin drops. And the first step, Netzach, is like he said, within the Mashpia himself, he needs to slow down the flow. It shouldn't just come rushing out. Okay. This is the conclusion where we stop. Right? This is to explain the Baraisas which are encompassed in the Mishna. But like Ilfa said, there's nothing in a Baraisa that cannot be found or cannot be resolved through a Mishnah, but it's beremes. But after Nesmai to Klei Makabel, meaning the next generation, like we're going to learn soon when that happened, the next generation where, in general speaking, things get diminished, the Klei Makabel, that's when you need, and there's seichel, so you need to explain it and detailed with more examples. Like a seichel, someone with a bas seichel gadol, it's enough. A summary, kitzur is enough. He'll pick it up from saying something briefly. You don't need to break it down into detail. You don't need to spell it all out. But a bas seichel katan on his own will not understand the details, so you need to break it down into detail. And that's kamaykei ribe apratim Baraisas mipnei shenismai ta'kelim. So that's where the Baraisas are different, where it says in the Gemaras, where it says Tanya, and that's a Baraisa. That's the distinction between a Baraisa and a Mishnah. And we know clearly that Chazal, the Gemara, makes a difference between them. It doesn't just say, if it was all exactly the same level, you just say it's all Mishnayos. Some Mishnahs are included in Mishnayos, some are included in the Gemara. But we call it a Baraisa. Rabbi Yitzchak posted an example right in the beginning, Mishnah Me'emasai, the first Mishnah in Shas, Me'emasai Keres Shashma V'arva, so you see the Mishnah, and he posted the Baraisa that is on that Mishnah, you say Tanya, where he goes into more detail, and you've got an example of what we find Mishnah and Baraisa, the example for what we just learned here. And this is throughout Shas, you'll find there's hundreds of Baraisas, of course hundreds of Mishnahs, but hundreds of Baraisas, and you'll see in each of them has that same feature, the breakdown of detail. Okay, that's a summary of what we learned. The next section is a qualification of the Rebbe Rashab. Remember, all this is based on a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, which is based on the Alter Rebbe's mimer in Eira Teira Shvuos, and I mentioned that a number of times. So now comes a qualification, because a question jumps out. You just mentioned Kitzur, and all the limited flow, the 1 second, and Nehi, we call that Baraisa the Nehi, and it comes down into more detail. So the question is this: didn't we learn earlier that Mikra? How do you distinguish between Mikra, which is also Nehi, true Nehi of Chabad, but Nehi, and also very short, very brief. Mikra also doesn't have any details. Story form, just a mitzvah without details. We said that explicitly, and without explanation. So he's going to explain the difference between the so-called concentration in Mikra, how it comes to us, and the difference between that and Mishnah and Baraisa. Now, the truth is that Tzemach Tzedek also addresses it. I recall when we learned it the first time, I explained the distinction. There's similar explanations, but different language. I'm not going to go through the comparison that you'll look up when we learned it the first time. We'll just review it here in the Ayin Beis. But if you want to look it up there in Eira Teira, it's on page 1567, and Eira Teira Shir Hashirim, page 973. Okay, but as I said, the comparison I'm not going to go into here, so we'll learn inside. So in the line that begins Hapratim de Baraisas, around 2/3 down the page, so the Vahagam, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says Vahagam, and though The le'il be'inyan Mikra Mishna and his boyer. When we spoke about the distinction between Mikra and Mishna, what was explained? The Mikra, the fishu b'chinas Nehi lechem ba b'kitzur. Since Mikra is coming from such a high level, and that's why only Nehi is revealed, that's why it comes in a kitzur. Very brief. Umaylas ha-Mishna is galo aprotim. And the mile of Mishnah Chagas is that it breaks it down into details. So if you wanted the details of the mitzvah in Mikra, you have to look at Mishnah. Mipnei Mishnah Chagas, because Mishnah is Chagas. Exactly what we learned back on page 1366. So we have now to understand how we can reconcile that. Not really a question, it's Hagam, it's a qualification. It's going to be a fascinating qualification, explanation to really understand the distinction. I'm sure everybody can speculate and guess what it is, but we'll read it inside from the Rebbe Rashab himself. Hine, so here's the explanation. Hine hakitza de mikra hu kamoy klal de nekuda. When we say kitza and mikra, we say it's like a klal and a nekuda, like a concentrated point that has within it a tremendous amount. She'ein bo izgalus haprotim klal. Think of it like a one cell upon conception of a new life. That one cell, yes, is a nekuda, it's kitzer. It's only one cell, or a seed, if you wish. But in it has everything, but it's not as galus haprotim at all there. That's what we mean by kitzer there. It's not kitzer that you've diminished the flow. That's why I was so insistent not to call it tzimtzum. He didn't call it tzimtzum, if you recall, Mikra. We had a discussion about that. It's not at all like that. It's on the contrary. It's so intense. It's higher than Gili. It's not a diminished Gili. It's higher than it. So that's the Nakuda of Mikra. Ulegabe klal kazeh is gal shapratim humayla. Lefisha klal b'chinas katnus v'apratim b'chinas gadlus. So when you're talking about that, Mishna, then when you reveal these details, when the cell starts splitting into two, I'm just using that as an example, but the same idea. When this klal, you start breaking into details in Mishnah, that's a maila, because the klal is in a state of katnus. Katnus here does not mean immaturity. We're not talking about katnus like we learned about nar, about the Mishnah, as in is and not developed. Katnus here means concentrated. So there's only a nakuda. So when you see a nakuda, two nakudas could be very different. One nakuda can be so much intensity, it's all captured in one point. Another nakuda can be, it's only one drop from a big amount. That's not the case in Mikra. So therefore, when you now reveal the details from that klal, that nakudas haklal of Mishnah, it's a maila. Because the klal is in a state of katnus v'apratim and b'chinas gadlus. The pratim are now developing. It's like, yes, it's beautiful to say that the concentrated cell includes the entire child, but you want a developed child. You want a child to develop, the fetus to develop, and then to be born, and you want the full-blown entity. That's a maila. Yes, it's true. It's all revealing the pratim from within the klal and the nakuda. But that's the maila of Mishnah. Ukiyadua, the Iggulim v'Yosher. He's bringing us back to some themes he spoke about earlier. So Iggulim v'Yosher, which is another name for makif and pnimi. Iggulim is like a circle. Yosher means a line. But essentially, it's talking about in Kabbalistic terminology, makif pnimi, sevav mamala is Iggulim and Yosher. The reason he uses Iggulim v'Yosher is because it's more the language from Eitz Chaim. So we know the Iggulim and Yosher is an interesting contrast. Which is a higher level? Iggulim is definitely higher. That's why it's so powerful. It's transcendent. It doesn't enter. Yosher is a pnimi. It enters in each level. But Iggulim is a makif, which is a helam. And Yosher is a pnimi, which is a gili. And if you remember, we learned earlier that the chitzenius of an Elyon is higher than the Penimiyus of a Tachton. So even though it's true, Mishna is more Penimiyus and more understandable, but Mikra is a higher level. So he's going to bring all this into the conversation here now. The Iggulim hu shebo b'bchinas klolos lavad. Because it's an igul, meaning it's such an intense energy, it only comes in a very general form that's very makivdik, transcendent. Hadizeh b'chinas katnus. That's called katnus. But not katnus in the context of little and diminished. It's katnus in the context of not not a detailed breakdown, not fleshed out. So it's katnus as in a concentrated form. The Yosher who shabab b'chinas protius, Yosher, which is a pnimi, comes b'protius, like in this case, Mishna detail. Harizeh b'chinas gadlus. So it says in Kabbalah, Chassidus explains, that's called godless. Why? Because it's like the development of the child. As much as that concentrated cell has so much in it, but you don't call it a developed child until the details start emerge. Ubedugma kazesi b'Mikra Mishna. An example for this is an example for Mikra Mishna, with Mikra being like the Iggulim, like the first level, a Nekuda, Klal. So it's in what he calls katnus here, but at that level of katnus, but it's not concentrated. And Mishna is the gadlus because it's Yosher, the Gilui HaPratim. U'makol mokim, and nevertheless, Mikra b'chinas Nehi of Elyon. But after all this, even though Mikra, when we read a pasuk, it's all that we just said, it's concentrated, it's just a story form, just a mitzvah, no details. But that is I called it the tip of the iceberg. But within it, it's a Nehi of Elyon. It's true. It's coming out as a nekuda, but what's within that nekuda? Where does it originate from? It originates from a level that's much higher than the chagas of the Mishnah. So in that sense, it's like Iggulim that are higher than Yosher. At the end of the day, an Iggul is a higher level than Yosher. It's just not. In other words, in the world of Giluyim, Mishnah and Chagas is a higher, I don't say higher, is a more developed level in Giluyim. But if you talk about Atzmi in the Etzem, I'm using my own language. He doesn't use the word Etzem here, but it's the same idea. In that Etzem and the Kudus, it's Lamaila me Yosher. But nevertheless, it's the chitzeni, because at the end of the day, it's the chitzenius of an Elyon, of a higher level. Mishna Penimiyus of Tachton. Mishna is taka Penimiyus in that sense, it's more gili, but it's of a lower level of a Tachton, canal, like we learned earlier, which also explains why he elaborated on that. That was back at the bottom of page 1367. We discussed that. This is all Mikra Mishnah. How about Baraisa? So Baraisa is a very different story. I'm sorry, I missed one more line. The Yeshmaila b'Bchinas Penimiyus. And there's also a quality in Penimiyus, like we just explained, because it's revealed, it's broken down into details, it's internalized. At the end of the day, Mikra, with all its intensity and all its high power, from our point of view, the recipient's point of view, Mishnah breaks into details and we can do something with it. Mikra is not enough for us to work with. It's not actionable in the sense. Where Mishnah breaks into details and tells you exactly what the halachas are. So there's that Maila. But if you talk about from the root and source, there's the Maila of Mikra over Mishnah. So what about in Baraisa? Baraisa breaks it down into even more detail, even more than Mishnah. So Legabe Mikra, Mishnah is a Maila because it's breaking into details of the Mikra is coming into details. The breakdown of details of Baraisa, Legabe Aprotim the Mishnah, compared to the details of Mishnah, which are not so detailed because it's not yet Nismaya to Hakelim. Remember, Baraisa is due to the fact that the Kelim of the recipients have now become lesser, therefore they need more details to explain it. Ayin Beis Maila. There's no quality. It's not the development of the Nekuda of Mikra. Here's the opposite. The details are due to a flaw, not a flaw, I will say to a weakness. This is due to the fact that the recipients are on a lower level. And therefore you need to say more. You need to explain more to them. So it's a different act. But Mishnah is the revelation of the details that are concentrated within Mikra. And Baraisa is the details of the Mishnah, and it's not enough for these minds. You need to break it down even further, spell it out even more. So it's a different type of context of how details are looked at. So there are times details are important, critical for the development of an entity like Mishnah compared to Mikra. And sometimes the details are simply because some students or different later generation need more to explain it to them more. But this leaves us with one issue that was going to be addressed later. Does this suggest that Moshe Rabbeinu and those in the time of that would recobble the Mikra, can they see what it says in the Mishnah from a pasuk? Because if they could, then you have to say that Mishnah is also the same idea. Mishnah is only spelling it out for those that can't see it in the pasuk in Teresh Biksav. And we're going to discuss that later. I just wanted to qualify. Right now, it's very clear that Mishnah is a Maila, because it brings out from the Mikra, which would mean even in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, even when Moshe was learning with Hashem, we say Torah b'pirusha nitna. When Hashem said, let's say, he told him what that means. He didn't just read the pasuk with him. So even Moshe, so you see right there that Mishnah was already a Maila. Baraisa, on the other hand, is because not everyone, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't need Baraisa. Definitely the Tanoim don't need the Baraisa, the first level Tanoim. It's only because the later generation or generations that need more details. That would be the obvious distinction based on what we just said. But we're going to learn more about this later, about Mikra and Mishnah, how they interact with each other. But here he just qualified the distinction between Baraisa and Mishnah and Mikra. So to round out the picture here. But he's going to go back to Baraisas now to explain a little more about what the Baraisas are. But let me stop if anybody wants to clarify any points here. Now, if you didn't get it from what I just explained, my suggestion is, listen to it again or read it again. You could always go back to I discussed it a few years ago when I first learned it, but it sometimes takes a little time to wrap your head around the distinction between the pratim in Baraisa and the pratim in Mishnah compared to Mikra. But at the end of the day, we have Chabad, Chagas Nehi as in Nehi of Zoh, meaning the Baraisa, Chabad being Mikra, Chagas being Mishnah, and the distinctions that we learned about it. And obviously the Nehi of Mikra, as it's revealed, is a concentrated point. That's why it only expresses itself in Asiyah, in action, like story, a mitzvah, no details, no explanation. Whereas Nehi of Baraisa would be more breakdown of details of Chagas. Very different conversation, very different context. Okay.
It's a little bit of chiddush.
Actually, even though they made the next paragraph a new paragraph, I see it actually probably continues from this paragraph. I just stopped because the paragraph ended, but I think we should read a few more lines at least, because he didn't finish the point. But he's going to say what I just said. But go ahead, since you're already asking something. What were you saying?
The way that he's explaining that Netzach is a להעלים, לעצר את ההשפעה, אין בזה גילוי ערך כל כך. It's a little bit a chiddush, at least to me. I couldn't understand it, because Netzach is the opposite, is to make it with an itzachon, to push through the inyan of chesed. Even when there is a Hagbala, then you are pushing it through. Here he's saying the opposite.
So first of all, Netzach can have different functions. Here he's using Netzach as an onaf, a branch of Chesed, and he says Zehu hashpah b'derech netzachen. What he means here is a successful hashpah that you need because of the flow. Here he's explaining it differently. He's definitely speaking about it as la'akev v'lahailim. Sometimes Netzach can be a strong power of restraint, the strength of restraint. Even though restraint sounds like a gvura dikamida, like holding back, but he definitely says the pomim la'akev v'lahailim ba'atzmei ava to slow down the flow. So it's not a contradiction. What you said is correct in other places, and I use it a lot in the Sfira Seimer book. That Netzachen is about determination, pushing it through, like Midas HaNetzach, like he speaks in Basaligani, Levaz B'Za Eitzes, when you need Netzanech to win over the enemy and push it through. It's correct. But here he's definitely speaking about Netzach in a different context. Just remember that the Esses Sfiris and the 10 Keiches have different functions. Even Chesed is not just one function, it has a lot of different functionalities. Same thing with Gvuras. So Netzach, he's speaking about it here, clearly in this Maimer, as the yarchin, as the Baraisa, as the regulators of the flow. Basically, it's bringing the midas of chagas into something more manageable. In the context of Nehi, more behavioral midas in contrast to emotional midas, where chagas is the pure raw midah, and Nehi is more the external expression of it. So there is that in Chassidus as well. So what you're speaking about is just two different applications. He's not using the one that you're just referred to about determination, which is a very strong drive. Here, I would say the strength is more in the restraint. So I explained what means b'derech nitzach, and I explained it two ways. Either successful, like mutzlach, like ish nitzachen. Talk about ish matzliach on Yosef. There's successful flow, or nitzachen that he overcame the urge to just let it flow without hagbolas. Sometimes the tzachon is the opposite, to make sure the flow is proper.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the truth is we should continue reading, and I'll stop more for questions afterwards, because I think there's another point he wanted to, as I said, they broke it into paragraphs. The paragraphs are from the Bachar HaZetzer, as they call it, the publisher, not from the Rebbe Rashab himself. So some of them are questionable whether the break is correct. So here he says clearly, so clearly it's flowing from before, because before he said it's Nehi of Elyon. If you look 5 lines from the bottom of last paragraph, he says Mikra b'chinas Nehi of Elyon. And now, by contrast, Baraisa hem b'chinas Nehi of Tachton. Very different. Nehi of Elyon would be Nehi of Chabad. Here it's Nehi of Tachton uboim b'schalkus Penimiyus ube'efen acham kamoy Mishna. And it comes down a breakdown of more details and a different idiom, a different paradigm, like we learned the third point, the way it is in Mishna. Here it says Salmusa'ir. With Mikra, it's just the outer expression of something, but the word is Salmus. There it's more the concentrated, is Lamaila Megilui, so it expresses itself in the Kuda, in the Nehi Sheba Elyon. Here the Nehi is actually in the world of Giluyim. That's very different. Giluyim are subject to more revealed, less revealed. Mishna is more revealed. Baraisa, I should say Mishna is more revealed. Baraisa bring it down even more detail. So it's a Salmus ha'oyer. It's more details, but the oyer itself is more Salmus. In Mikra, it's higher than Giluyim in the first place. That's the challenge with Mikra. That's why Mikra comes from a level of Chabad, of Ma'ayin Temotza, as we discussed earlier. So here it's more of a breakdown and more details. The wisdom, the oyer of the wisdom radiates more in Mishna than in Baraisa. But the reason for that is because in Baraisa you're talking about a next generation where you have or a next period, a next era where you have a katnus hakelim that diminished. The kelim are more diminished, and they need more details. So that's clearly when you bring it down, because the Eira Chochmah is not shining as much. When the Eira Chochmah is shining more, like he said, a Seichel Gadol Yosher doesn't need that many details. It's enough to give it to him in Kitzur, in the language of Mishnah. Here you need to bring it down in more details. Tzad Katnus HaKelim, and with Mikra we don't say Mitzad Katnus HaKelim. We say Mitzad Gadlus HaEir. Because it's so intense and so beyond Gilui, the only way it can express itself is just the outer dimension of it. Here it's mitzad beferish, mitzad katnus hakelim. That's why Mikra is equal to everybody, whether it's a big chacham or a less chacham. Everyone sees the same pasuk. A Mikra is a different level altogether. Mishna and Baraisa, there you have the distinction between more revealed, less revealed, based on the containers, the recipient's containers. He sends us to the Maimon Va'era. That's in volume 2. I have to look up what he says there. Okay. Now he's going to continue to explain why Baraisa is this level by quoting a few sources. But here I'll stop again in case anybody wants to ask anything. Ulechein isa b'zeyar. And that's why it says in Zayar, Baraisa heim bizman bayesheni. That the Baraisas are connected to the time of the second temple. What he means by that is, and I recall we discussed it, Mishna was also compiled during the time of the end of the second temple. So what does he mean by this? What he means by this is before Bayesheni, they still had Mishna, they just didn't write it down. As I said, Teire bepirushin itna. Mikra and Mishna came together, all the generations. Till then, it was only that Rabbi HaKodesh, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, wrote it down. But the Mishnah was there. Baraisa was a chiddush that emerged due to the miyut hakelim Bayesheni. Mipnei she'oz yorda b'chinas malchus lislabish ba'ayin sorim levar b'chinas neged asiya. Because then in Bayesheni, malchus went into a yerida, where manifested ayin sorim are the 70 ministers that represent the 70 nations, in order to be mevarer the level of noiga da'asiya, to be mevarer klippus neiga of asiya. So let me explain.
Mishnah was also after Bayesheni. Rabbi Yehuda Anossi was after Bayesheni.
And I just answered the question. I asked the question and I answered it.
No, you said that it was before. What do you mean it was before? It was not
Moshe
before.
Rabbeinu had Mishnah Teire b'pirushin itna.
And this
It was just
including the
not written
Baraisa
down.
also, no?
No,
Baraisa is
that's
not.
That's what the Zohar says. That Baraisas emerged were necessary because Malchus was yeded, and before that was not necessary. Because like a Chacham Gadol could understand it all from the Mishnah. That's what Bapashtas is saying here. So let's explain what this means. We've been talking about stages of how the Torah is revealed and expressed. Now remember, history...
Can I ask a question?
Let me just explain this and then I'll take the question. So now, so the generations of Torah's process, remember the Torah is Leba Shamayim Hi. It's not in heaven. It was meant to help us, to guide us, to be a guiding light, Torah Hera B'chaim, in our world. So the Torah has to fit the different levels of where people are at. And that's why throughout history, when we talk about Bayis Rish and Bayis Sheni, we don't just think in terms of, oh, this was one temple and then was a second temple. Or Matan Torah was another stage. And before that, the others. These are actually stages in Birur, Ha'elam. In other words, when Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden, then it was the purest level. They were in Gan Eden, and the goal was, La'avdal L'Shamra, they should serve God there, and the light that they would generate, the divine energy they would generate, would gather all the sparks from wherever they were. The Alter Rebbe gives the example of an avuka, a torch, that's so powerful that it draws all the sparks, and they wouldn't have to transmigrate and leave Gan Eden and go all over the world, whether it was in Asia or in Israel or Europe or later to the United States. All the sparks would be drawn. But since they didn't do it, and the world descended a lower level, like we learn in Bas Ligani from Medrash Shir Hashir and Rabbah, that after the Chet Tzadas, the Shechina was nostalgic. Then was another level, Istalkus Hashchina, 7 generations, until Avram began to draw it back down. That tells you that as the generations pass, there's more and more a Yerida of Malchus, meaning Malchus is lower, not Istalkus Hashchina, but Malchus goes lower into the material world. And as such, we need the Birurim have to become more immersive. And that's why there's the growth of population and the transmigration of the human race began to spread all over the world to go find those sparks. It wasn't enough to just remain in your location and draw them l'mayla l'mata. Now you have to go l'mata l'mayla. So one of these stages is the stage of Bayis Sheni, especially the end of Bayis Sheni, when, of course, as we know, in Bayis Sheni already they were missing 5 things were missing. You didn't have the Aron and other things from Bayis Rishon. So you saw Yerida in that sense of Gili Elikus. But especially at the end, as Bayis Sheni was coming to the end of before the destruction, that was a Yerida in Gili Elikus in this world. So therefore the Kalim were in Smayit, and as such you needed to have more details of Baraisa, not because of a Maila, because of a Chasson, because you have to bring it down. That's why he calls it the Malchus and Mislabish. Now, Ayin Sodim is like on Sukkot, we bring 70 bulls corresponding to the Shivim Umis, 70 nations, even though there may be more than 70, but there's 70 general nations. And these nations of the world represent the Birurim of Klippas Nega, of Nega Vasiya. So he's basically saying, the Zohar, that because Malchus descends into the Misabish, into now more involved with the nations of the world. Remember, when the Bais, when especially Bais Rishon stood, they didn't engage with the nations that much, especially the time of Shlomo HaMelech. And Shlomo stayed where he was, and Malchus Shva and others came to him. Similar to that, the Alter Rebbe says he drew them to him. But as the time passed, like even you have of course the Golus of Poras, which was the story of Purim between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. Then the story of Hanukkah during Bayis Sheni. So you see already you're dealing with nations, with klippas, with wars and battles that have to be fought. The true Hanukkah was a victory, but it was a victory over darkness. So, bottom line, it's mislabish b'ayin sodim levar b'chinas neged asiyah, and therefore that's the result of that is when the Baraisas began to emerge. Now, exactly, it doesn't say here exactly what stage. We have to look up the Zohar to see, but very clearly that the Baraisas were a result of this Yerida, and therefore, just like a student that's on a lower level needs more details, whereas someone learning Mishna, Seichel Godli Yesem Maspik Le'akitzav Ein Sichim Lefaret Harbe. He's going to explain this furthermore, but I'll stop in case anybody wants to ask anything. Well, I'll just say one more line. V'zeu gam kein Baraisa.
Hello.
V'zeu gam kein Baraisa. One more thing. V'zeu. 1 second. Let me say one more line. V'zeu gam kein Baraisa loshen chutz. Remember on the previous page he said Baraisa is from the word outer. Bar yaisa. Shehu islapshus b'chinas chutz. So now he's explaining, because that's exactly what Baraisa is. It's a slapshus on the outer, to the outside of the Mokam HaKdusha. So Baraisa is bringing essentially Torah to the next level, to be Mevada, the Berurim Bechutz. And that's why it's called Baraisa. So that just rounds out what Baraisa is. Okay. Any questions?
Right. So you kind of anticipated my question a little bit, but my question is more, I don't know, balabatish. With respect to the emergence of Baraisas and the period of the Second Temple, so I understand there's clearly a diminution in the sort of general knowledge of Elokus, which requires greater detail, which requires, like you said, the Berurim. So I understand there's a whole spiritual unfolding here, and that was, that's what you just explained. But in tandem with that, not in opposition to it, and not different than that, but as a practical matter, would it be fair to say that as time rolls on, and particularly in times of poor behavior and sort of a diminution in the holiness of Klal Yisrael, including its leaders and teachers, that there's, like in Zman Bayis Hasheni, there was corruption, there was sinas b'chinam, there was conflicts between different groups and obviously foreign influences.
And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and we're going to learn about it. Because we haven't gotten to Talmud yet.
Right. I get
the answer is yes, and we're going to learn about it explicitly. He didn't even get to Talmud yet. But he's going to explain exactly that's Talmud, and then later generations is going to discuss it all.
Right. I'm asking a very simple, practical question. The organizers of the Mishna and the Talmud generally, well, they added the Baraisa more explicitly at that time. And the question is not just why, because of the diminution and what I said, but because as a practical matter, people had lost an understanding because of the foreign influences and all these distractions, internal strife, etc. They these details that were perhaps obvious to someone learned.
Why is that not all included in the word nismaya to hakelim?
It's absolutely included. I was speaking just as a practical matter, how it coincides with the loss of knowledge.
He just says it very briefly here, but you can elaborate and go and do research of exactly why Baraisas were created and so on. Here he says it in too few words. Nismaya to hakelim, a yurida. Clearly, yurida malchus lislabish ba'ayin sarim levar b'chinas neged asiya. And that's exactly what the need for the Baraisas. You want to explain it more in context of the events of the time? By all means. It's all connected. The fact of the matter is, we know Bayis Sheni would come to an end in that period. So clearly there was plenty of, the Golus would begin. So this was all that stage in the history, the shift over from the time of Bayis to the time of Golus, that we're still in that same Golus Eden, the Roman Empire destroying the Second Temple.
100%. Okay, thank you.
A practical question: where could you find the Baraisas?
They're all over the Gemara. You see Tanya, wherever it says Tanya. Look on the group WhatsApp. Rabbi Yitzchak posted the first Baraisa is right in the beginning of in Brachos. Wherever it says Tanya, it means you're learning a Baraisa. So there are Sfarim that document all the Baraisas. There are hundreds of Baraisas throughout Shas.
My question was just technically, where are they printed?
Yeah, is there a sefer of Baraisas just like
there's no sefer of Baraisas? Maybe there's a sefer that marks and tells you where all the Baraisas are. Maybe someone did that. I don't know, but I don't think there's a sefer called Sefer HaBaraisas like a Mishnayos. We have a Mishnayos. Baraisas are scattered all over. Through the context when they're learning the Gemara, the Amoraim, they start quoting Baraisas here and there. I don't know. And the truth is, we know like this. We say there are Shisha Sidre Mishna, B'Shmeinim Palakshim, right? There's 80 Baraisas, I think.
Shishim Heina Alamois, Shmeinim Pilakshim. So Alamois is some of the Mishna and the Pilakshim, the Baraisas.
Right. So maybe there's 80, maybe there's more. I don't know. The truth is, I need to look into what, I'm sure you can look it up today. And I'm sure someone has listed or at least marked where they are.
It's funny that nobody, took it upon themselves to write such a, if I was capable, I would do it. It's such a great idea, I think.
Maybe someone did. I don't know. I don't remember seeing, but it's hard for me to imagine that you can't find it easily today. You just have to do a search all the places it says Tanya and Shas. I can look it up. When I have some time, I'll look up. I am sure there's today with all the translations of Shas and so on, that someone in an introduction wrote what a Mishna is, what a Baraisa is, where they are, how they are. So I'm sure we can find them.
In this,
okay, so
from this point, I just want to ask another question concerning our time. What I could understand that you said there is a limited type of Sephardim books that explain us Baraisas. How about today and the books that are created right now with the Chachamim? Are they not belong to Baraisas?
No, they don't belong to Baraisas. No, they are. There's generational changes that we're going to talk about when we learn further. After Baraisa comes Talmud. The next level is Talmud, Gemara. That's this generation of Amoraim. After Talmud will be Rabbanon Savaroi. After that will be Go'inim. Then will be Rishonim and Achreinim and Achreinim. There's plenty of a hierarchy of stages that go through the generations. We'll talk about it later. Right now we're up to the Baraisa stage. Baraisa is the end of the Mishnayos generation, the end of the Tanoim. The next will be the Amoraim in Gemara, Talmud, what we call Talmud here. And then he's going to talk about what happens after Talmud. He talks about it briefly, but I'll elaborate as we go. And I think I did when we learned it the first time. Yeah. And it's all in the same context. As the generations pass, the Torah comes and is spelled out in ways that we can relate to. I mean, the fact, for example, that today you can't learn Shas without Rashi. But till Rashi only lived 800-900 years ago. How'd they learn Shas before Rashi? Today, you can't learn without the Rambam. These people lived many years later. They lived 800-900 years ago. The Rambam is right after Rashi. So you have so many of the fundamental commentaries and commentators and interpreters of Talmud and so on. We didn't have a Shulchan Aruch back then. So you see clearly there's an evolution of Torah thought and Torah scholarship and Torah, how the Torah evolved, so to speak, through the generations. We'll talk about it a lot more later, because it's all part of the birur of, remember, the theme here, the central theme is the interface between divine and existence, bringing Torah, bringing Hashem's Torah into a world that is anything but godly, a world that is concealed, that is hostile to godliness, that's selfish, a violent world, a hostile world, etc., a dark world. So the Torah has to be tailored and be drawn down. Later we'll talk about the Iggulim of Penimiyus of Tachton in the time of the Arizal, the time of the Baal Shem Tov, Chassidus. All of this is part of the process, the historical process of bringing godliness into this world. So on one hand, as the generations pass, it gets weaker because they're lesser than the previous generations. On the other hand, they're also higher Giluyim. Like you hear about Chassidus, is a taste of Mashiach's Torah, because more darkness, sometimes you need a higher Gilui. Right now, he's not talking about that yet. He did mention Penimiyus of Tachton, but he didn't discuss it in the context of the generations. We will discuss it, but later. Let's do it in an orderly right. Right now, we're middle of Baraisa. He's going to then move to Talmud, and then he's going to explain the three levels of Makabel. And in there, he's going to talk about what happens after Talmud. He's going to talk about even till the point where there was Ruach HaKodesh in the times of the Marsha, he brings to the times of Rishonim and Achreinim. We'll soon see more of this as we go on. Yeah.
In Wikipedia, I don't know how it's reliable or not. He's saying that Baraisa are Ma'amorim of Tanoim that were not put in the Mishnayos. That's why it's called Baraisa.
Outside the base Medrash, correct. Outside of the Mishna, yeah.
And there is no Ksavya that writes all the Baraisas. They are spread in all the Gemores. Some of them are in Tisefta, with Rosh Halacha. But he said that there is a guy, all the Baraisas in Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, a guy with the name Michal Higel, that he put all of them in, he called it Pitzara Baraisas, and there are 10 krochim, 10 bands of them.
Okay.
I said, yeah, okay, he's continuing. The Baraisa is also very not detailed, and that's why there are many Baraisas that hard to understand.
Okay, so the Chiddush here in Ayin Beis, he's explaining how Baraisas, what it means Beruchnius. That's the technical part of Baraisas. Like why Taka were they not part of the Mishna, etc. So that's what he's explaining here, because it is another level of Torah learning. Yeah.
My point is, if we are out of creating the new books, what is the goals of our Chachamim and the builders of the God's creation? They supposed to just be teachers?
I said we're going to learn this later. He's going to talk about this later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Literally the bottom of page 1371. We'll stop here. Still in the middle of Baraisa, another good half a page of Baraisa, then he's going to go to Talmud.